Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the 8th edition of the IIIE School of Economics Alumni Interview Series. My name is Humayun Dar, and today I have a very distinguished member of the alumni, Dr. Abdul Haq Ameeri, who is currently based in Geneva. And since he left the university, I believe towards the end of the 1980s, he has been doing a lot of things. And before any further ado, I would like to go to Brother Dr. Abdul Haq Ameeri. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And I would like to request you to kindly please update us. What have you been doing since you left the university?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. First of all, I'm very grateful and thank you for providing this opportunity to talk to you. Wa alaikum assalam wa salam ala kull viewers. As you said, this is really an opportunity to also take me back to the youthful age and also to the university time and friends and colleagues, to reconnect with you and with colleagues, with friends. I'm speaking at my capacity as an alumni and also as a citizen of Afghanistan. Has nothing to do what I say with the work that I am doing, as you have outlined. I entered university International School of Economics in Islamabad in 1985. I think I was among the batch of the groups that were maybe first or second generation. I don't remember exactly, but it was a time for someone like me. It was a time of despair, hopelessness, where you would struggle even dreaming for an opportunity to get an education. So in that sense, it would not be very wise if I don't say a big thank you to the International School of Economics, the leadership of that School of Economics, who provided that opportunity for a young boy who had to run his country at the time through landmines, through the mountains, and end up in another country with no family members, no relatives, no language skills, and yet be able to find an education institution where you could pursue your education and build your life. So those days, as I said, it was a time of despair because the Soviets had invaded Afghanistan. The communist regime invited the Soviet Union, they invaded Afghanistan. 6 million people were refugees or displaced to neighboring countries and within the country as well. Hundreds of thousands killed, massacred around, and it was a situation where one would at 1985, at the peak of the Soviet Union, it was very difficult for a young boy like myself to imagine one day Afghanistan would be free. Indeed, the determination was there, and I'm very proud of my people, what they have done. But honestly, at that time, it was very difficult that I would ever be able to go back to my home and see my family or family members, etc. So that is the part of the despair. The other part of the despair was that as you go as a very young boy in another country with actually no status, neither refugee status, nor visa, nor anything, and with no hope for future, it becomes really difficult to live and find your way.
May I stop you here? Given that you did not have any formal status at the time of applying to the university, what was the reaction of the university authorities at that time?
Well, at that time, what I did was I went to the Afghan Refugee Commissionerate and got a Shnakhti pass, an ID card that would register me as a refugee. But it was as a single man, like not a family. So I did not have a full refugee status, but I had an ID card where I could, that could give me some legal presence or status in Pakistan. Honestly, my finding of the university is that it was based on merit. You remember that you would take entrance exam.
Yes.
And if you pass the exam, you are entered into the School of Economics. And we were the first two EVA Afghan students, Kadir Fitrat and myself, that passed that exam and entered into the School of Economics. We opened the door for a lot of other fellow Afghans who benefited from that school, who got the confidence that things can be done. Doesn't matter. You can study, even if you don't, know a great deal of English. But I think that was one. But I must say, before entering the university, actually I spent about 7 months or 8 months in Lahore at Said Maududi Institute, where me and Abdul Kadir Fitra, we studied English language. And that English language, Urdu and Arabic as well, but that 7 months of English language prepared us in terms of being able to take the entrance exam at the School of Economics, International School of Economics.
Which institute was that one? Did you mention this?
It was called Said Maududi Institute. It was in Lahore, in Al Mansura.
Right. Okay.
So I think that foundation was very, very helpful for us. 7 months of studying, self-studying, and also because the support from the school would not prepare you to the level of university. But the determination, persistence, and hard work pays off. So we took the entrance exam in Islamabad, and we passed the exam. Luckily, we continued. So I did my undergraduate, and then I entered the masters. I did my masters at Islamic University, International School of Economics. Finished it at 1991, and that summer I went to the US in pursuit of my higher education. So after return from the US, when I was actually working, studying and doing my master's, I was also able to do some part-time job with an Institute of Policy Studies in Islamabad.
Right.
After my return, I didn't go to the IPS, Institute of Policy Studies, but I went to join the USAID. There was a USAID project in Peshawar, which was doing, again, the Department of Research and Planning. We were doing a lot of research on education in Afghanistan. And within a few months, I joined the United Nations Office for Afghanistan in Islamabad.
Right.
Worked there for 5 years, and then went to Tajikistan, is heading a small office in Tajikistan for 2 years for the same organization. When, those years, Tajikistan was also emerging from a very crucial civil war, but also they had a very severe drought. So I was a key component in terms of preparing for appeal for Tajikistan in the year 2000, 2001, and also responding both to the drought and to the consequences of the conflicts that they had, but also working with the Ministry of Emergencies to building their capacities in terms of taking over the responsibility for responding to their own emergencies.
Right.
So since then, I have been moving around the world for the past 25 years, and every major humanitarian crisis, particularly in the Middle East, I have worked. I have been there in the beginning, I have been there in the middle, I have worked with them. And I feel very humble in terms of being at least at the front line of humanitarian response for the people whose lives have shattered by either natural calamities, mostly in Indonesia, particularly when I was there, but also our Bam earthquake in Iran, or the conflicts that are in the Middle East that we have seen, or Africa, north of Africa, like Sudan and other places, Ethiopia.
Let me ask you a related question. Given that you have, mashallah, specialized in humanitarian efforts and affairs. And humanitarian crises may be of different nature. One could be because of natural disasters, and other could be because of something to do with human beings. For example, a political problem because of which humanitarian issues would become relevant. Which one of these two, a crisis created by natural disasters or a crisis created by human activities, which one is more difficult to respond to?
Each crisis have its own scale, scope, and characteristics, first. Secondly, if we talk about the general terms, indeed, the man-made crises are increasingly riskier and difficult to respond to as compared to the natural calamities. Because the thing is that natural calamities like tsunamis, earthquakes, they happen in countries that are stable. So you go to that country, there is a government of the country who requests international assistance. You work with your government counterpart and you respond, you have a counterpart, correct? In that sense, from a humanitarian point of view, it is a lot easier working with that mechanism and using that tools. So the rule of us is the United Nations or international community is humanitarian responders. Going to a situation like that is to not replace the government institutions or mechanism, but to enhance their capacity, but to offer a helping hand, like floods in Pakistan, floods in Bangladesh, and many other places. When it comes to the humanitarian crisis created by humanity, by conflicts, first, these conflicts are taking place in fragile countries where the states are failing or they have failed.
All right.
Correct. And secondly, where there are a plethora of non-state actors, all with different ideologies, with different strategies, with different background. And it makes it very risky and very difficult to find your way in terms of reaching to the people who are in need. You need to develop skills and tools to negotiate with those groups who come in, in front of you or on your way when you are going to help people who have escaped the conflict, front lines of the conflict, and who are displaced in one location or the other location. So access becomes a huge problem. Logistics becomes a huge problem. Protection of civilians in the conflict situation becomes a huge problem. And there are plenty of other issues that we see in terms of year and after year, in terms of complexity of responding to what we call it complex emergencies.
Brother Abdul Haq, you have witnessed the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. And for us, we witnessed it from outside. You were part of it in a way. Okay. In the beginning, you said you fled the country while this crisis was going on. So and you have seen so many crises around the world, where would you place Afghanistan crisis in terms of humanitarian problems as compared to other crises in the Muslim world or elsewhere?
As you said, I fled the country at a very early age. I myself, there is no shame in saying that I have experienced being displaced and being refugee, even though I didn't have a refugee status in terms of a formal refugee status, with the allocations and entitlements that comes with it. Never benefited from that. But yet, I was in the international terminology, when you cross an international border, you're a refugee. So in that sense, yes. Afghanistan crisis in the 1990s, when I was working there, were perhaps, if not the single most worst crisis in the planet, it was one of the most dangerous and worst crisis in the planet, where warlordism was, everywhere, where drug lordism was everywhere, where decisions were made by the commanders or by the frontline managers at their own decisions. And we have seen unfortunate situations of behaving people, hanging hands and legs and whatever, that you could not expect from a civilized human society. But this is what the war brings, correct? Atrocity, brutality, destruction, misery, and all of that. Things changed post-Taliban for the 2 decades, a little bit. There were, in the beginning, hope that the people of Afghanistan would be able to stand on their feet, that will be able to say goodbye to the crisis, and that they would no longer be requiring international assistance in terms of, humanitarian assistance. Development assistance is a norm that has to and should continue for all developing countries. But in that case, over the past decade, I'm not going into the reasons and causes of it. We have seen a reverse of the situation, unfortunately. Today, as I'm speaking to you, there is hardly any district in Afghanistan that is safe. There are fighting on the streets. There are looting. There are warlordism. There are very, very unfortunate situation, particularly in the rural areas, in the districts, and also in the major cities, actually, criminality and all of that. Obviously, in terms of scale and scope, Afghanistan is one of the top 10 crises in the planet that we have, if not in the top 5 yet.
Right. And, in the Muslim world, we continue to see crises after crises. In your view, what is the basic root cause of these crises in the Muslim world and probably in the wider world?
In 25 years of my life, every crisis that I have gone, whether Muslim or non-Muslim, if you look at the root causes of the problems, the root causes are economics and development failures, not humanitarian, and people cite ethnicity, people cite ideology, people cite politics, people cite dictatorship, etc., etc. All of these could be true, but the driving factors for emerging crises or humanitarian crisis are economic factors, where you see that the population is growing massively in this part of the world. Unemployment is increasing massively. There is a massive diversity or inequality in the distribution of resources and wealth, and there is an increasing discontent youth, well-educated, connected to the rest of the world, inspired by what is happening in developed countries, yet they look back and see that they are, with their education, they are struggling and they have nothing. So the root causes are economic factors. And if you address those economic factors, if you address the inequality, if you address the injustice, if you address the unemployment, if you address the growth of the population, a host of these, and if you provide basic social services to the people that they need, countries that have been able to do that, they are much more stable and they are progressing. Countries that have failed have also failed in terms of building states and institutions, and they are struggling with conflicts and crises. So I think that is where it comes to.
Right. Okay. It's very interesting. In a way, it's very simple. Okay. Look at your economic fundamentals. If there is any problem, then you should be worried. This may lead to a very big crisis. If your economic fundamentals are not right, try to correct them. Otherwise, you will be in big trouble. And this is consistent with what we see in the Western countries. In general, there is prosperity. Income disparities are not that much. Okay.
Yeah.
Unemployment is looked at very carefully. If there is an increase in unemployment, the governments become very nervous. Inflation rate is looked up very carefully. If it breaches the band, then a lot of emergency measures are taken.
Yes.
So at the end of the day, okay, you rightly mentioned that this is all about economics. Unfortunately, in the Muslim world, my observation is that we bring a lot of other factors. They may be important, but in terms of their relative importance, they are very, very low in the pecking order. For example, a lot of people say that no, we are in trouble because we are not adhering to our faith, or we are in trouble because we are not true to our own local culture. We are in trouble because we have this social problem. But I'm very happy to learn from you as an expert on humanitarian affairs that a solution is relatively easier to achieve if we keep, or if we make our economic affairs in order.
Indeed. The strategies that your elites in the developing countries they develop, these strategies unfortunately have not been addressing the root causes of the fragility and the conflicts. And if you don't address those root causes, then you are not treating the patient, not curing, but you are dealing just with the symptoms momentarily. And short-term vision, short-term planning, short-term goals, ad hoc strategies is waste of time, waste of resources, and brings anxiety. So if one thing we all have learned from the crisis around us is, as you said, fix your economy, focus on your development priorities, focus on your youth employment, youth education, particularly women and boys education, girls and boys education, and also women employment, and all of that, particularly in the Muslim world, because of the traditions that we Muslims have mixed the tribal culture with the Islamic culture and given it somehow an Islamic name, has put half of our population unproductive, correct? Have made half of our population out of the market. So I think it might be very useful if we would like to address any of these crises. The moment you fix, look into the economic factors and fix those factors, you are fixing a problem. Responding through humanitarian assistance, you're saving a life here and there, but you're maybe helping with the symptoms, but you're not curing the disease. You're not eradicating the disease, unfortunately.
Humanitarian efforts, they are being undertaken by different organs of the United Nations. And you are part of these activities. In the Muslim world, have you found any effective organizations which are contributing to humanitarian activities in a national context or regional context, and you say that, oh, these guys are doing quite a wonderful work?
I must tell you that 5 years of my life, when I was heading the regional office of my own organization for the Middle East and North Africa and Central Asia out of Cairo, one of the several key priorities that I was focusing and I was doing was developing partnership with the Muslim humanitarian organizations from the Muslim world, bridging the gap between the Muslim and non-Muslim Western and Southern NGOs. So I worked quite a lot in that context with the Islamic Organization of Islamic Conference. At that time, the Assistant Secretary General was Dr. Bahid, a very good friend of mine. May Allah protect him. He, with him and with a Turkish NGO called IHH, with Qatar Red Crescent, with another NGO at UAE, and around us, several NGOs, we got together, and ICRC as well, the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, and we discussed quite a lot what needs to be done and how can we increase professionalism. The challenge I faced in the Muslim world is that in terms of the humanitarian assistance, the amount of humanitarian assistance that goes from the few of the Gulf countries to different countries around the globe is no less than the global humanitarian assistance comes from developed countries. Right. The point is, how are we using those assistance strategically, and how much are we telling the world that we are doing this to benefit people, right? And that requires professionalism. That requires different use of different tools and services. So that's what we did. We provided a lot of workshops and seminars in the 5 years that I was in the Middle East, particularly in the Gulf countries, discussing the architecture, the humanitarian architecture that exists at international level, and how the Muslim organizations can, link with it, benefit from it, but also contribute to it. Because the thing is that as a charity, you go to a country and you build a mosque, correct? And then you leave. It's very good, a mosque with walls, people will benefit from it. But if you go to that country, you build a mosque, but also together make use of the mosque to be a convening venue for the people to discuss their problems, correct? And solve their issues, bring their children to get the first level of education and things, a lot of other things, correct? Arrange their ceremonies, happy or sad, unfortunately, whatever. You are creating sustainability, correct? You build a hospital in a country and you leave, but the country does not have the doctors, the country does not have the medical supplies, the country does not have this and that. So where is the sustainability of that, correct? So I think that's one issue that I have observed. The other issue is that in the Muslim countries, charities, they do things based on this, it's more supply driven rather than demand driven, right? I have blankets, I give blankets, I have dates, I give dates, I have food, I give food, whatever. That's number one. Number two, there is hardly any coordination among the charities themselves. Even from one country, you could see several charities working in another country, but hardly talking to each other, correct? I mean, now it has improved quite a lot, but this was the case, let's say 10 years ago. Right. So I think what is important and has been, there has been enormous improvement in this regard. Some of the charities from the Muslim world, they took the leadership and they have come forward, and therefore they are doing quite well. The third element is that it also goes back to the books of Islam, where Muslims believe that when you give charity by one hand, the next hand should not hear about it. That is seen from a Western world is being sacred and secrecy. When you are sacred, people conspiracy theory kicks in. So I have been discussing with a lot of the leaders in the Muslim, especially Arab world, telling them, look, we are in 21st century. There is no need to be secret. We need to go up and tell the world, this is what the portion of the humanitarian load that we are taking over, and we are dealing it in this way, and let us talk to each other so that your resources are not wasted in the same area where I am putting my resources, correct? So in that way, one person do not get 5 blankets, the other person get nothing. You see what I mean? So that's how it should be. So I think there is still room for improvement in terms of coordination, in terms of strategizing the delivery of humanitarian assistance, and in terms of making use it to the greater good. And I think OIC took some very solid steps in terms of creating a venue for coordinating among the Muslim NGOs and then linking them to the international community. But we have also created mechanisms that brings them into the international system. Allow me just to explain one thing. You may have read my article that I published, and it was published by UDI London in 2011, at the early days of the Arab Spring.
Right.
There, I actually hinted to a point where the two cultures needed to understand each other and needed to come together, where the NGOs, the charities from the Muslim world need to get involved in the international architecture, the international mechanism, and where is the international architecture and mechanism need to understand and be open and inclusive to get these charities into that one. And there I actually raised the role of the importance and the role of the local organizations in responding to humanitarian crises and responding to humanitarian needs. 5 years later, you may remember that in 2016, my organization and the government of Turkey, they organized the World Humanitarian Summit.
That's right. Actually, I would like to interrupt you. In 2016, when this World Humanitarian UN Humanitarian Forum was held in Istanbul, that was the time when we started our Global Good Governance Awards.
Wow.
So the same time, we held the award ceremony over there. And I must say that since then, a number of United Nations organizations, they have been represented in those Global Good Governance Awards.
Wonderful. No, because one of the outcomes, they had several results that all member states agreed. And one of the results that member states agreed was the localization of aid. Because when we, as a community of international, go to a community, we need to click with the responders of that community. We need to bring them in, and we need to find a common language because they are from the communities. They know the language, they know the situation, they know the need of the people. How could I know, coming from outside, who needs what, correct? They would be a very good advisor in terms of helping us to prioritize, in terms of providing needs and assessment. So I think that is where we need to do a lot more. And because you and I are talking about both are graduate of the Islamic School of International School of Islamic Economics, I think it is important to call upon all humanitarian organizations in the Muslim world to really do their best efforts to coordinate themselves among themselves and with the rest of the world to show and demonstrate what good has been done by these charities and by those Muslim countries to the people around the globe. There are huge amount of humanitarian assistance going from the Muslim world to even Latin America, Africa, to a lot of other parts of the world. But there has been very little spoken about them because we, as I said, we do not wish to publicize them. It's not about the publicity. It's about how can we work in harmony and coordination with others in terms of making better benefit.
And how you can be more effective and have more impact.
Exactly.
That's right. Actually, I'm really inspired by our conversation today. And because you are a humanitarian affairs expert, let me suggest something towards the end. We are reaching now the end of this session.
Yep.
In Islamic finance, there is a lot of emphasis on sukuk, Islamic bonds. However, in the humanitarian domain, there is a lot of scope of another instrument of Islamic economic significance called waqf. Now, if United Nations can come up with a global humanitarian waqf to which Muslim organizations, Muslim governments, Muslim philanthropists, they can contribute, and the initial targeted size of this global humanitarian waqf could be $1 billion. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And this can be increased. A lot of research and practical steps are being taken in the domain of cash waqf. Cash waqf allows people like me and you to contribute even $10 into a waqf.
Yep.
Traditionally, waqf would mean that, oh, creating an endowment and this asset, land primarily, that should be there. But now, because of the jurisprudential advancements in the field of waqf, cash waqf is being emphasized very significantly. And if a body like United Nations can lead in this respect, I believe the first global humanitarian waqf can be set up, which would give a lot of goodwill to Muslims. That, Muslims, as you said, they have been contributing to humanitarian causes all over the world, but somehow their efforts have not been recognized fully. So if a global humanitarian waqf is formally set up, and the Muslims, and of course non-Muslims can contribute to it as well, if this is set up and if its benefits start coming out in different societies, that would create a lot of goodwill amongst the communities. This would be Muslims' formal contribution to humanitarian efforts. Brother Abdul Haq, actually, we can talk about this thing for hours and hours, but unfortunately, we have reached the end of the time allocated for this session. I would like to invite you once again in future, and we can continue this conversation then.
Thank you, with pleasure.
I'm sure our viewers would enjoy this interview. I have enjoyed it very much, and I have benefited from your observations, your thoughts, and your experiences. With this, I would like to conclude this session. I would come back with another member of the alumni, and we would discuss quite a number of other things. And of course, we would have some light moments as well. So with this one, I would like to say Assalamu alaikum and goodbye.